Hello everyone and welcome to another session of AP Human Geography with Mr. Elrod. Today we're going to continue on in Unit 6 discussing industrial and economic development. In our previous video we were looking at the dependency theory and the Wallerstein's world system analysis as a way to explain this idea of the development gap. And in that video we were looking at what's called the structuralist model or the structuralist theory. In this particular video we're going to be looking at what's called a liberal theory. Now when you hear the word liberal, typically we tend to think in modern American politics or world politics, you think about liberals as Democratic Party, progressives, things like that. When we talk about liberal in this sense, we're talking about what's called classical liberalism, which goes back to the Age of Enlightenment, talking about liberalism in terms of freedom and equality and those types of things. So that's kind of the liberalist approach because it advocates for a more it advocates for a more free market, open market, global trade system where you reduce tariffs and you reduce barriers to trade, and so that's what this particular model is advocating for. So just like in the last video, we were looking at reasons for the development gap. So this model 2 also seeks to explain that idea of why there is a development gap in our world. This particular model we are looking at today is what's called Rostow's model, and Rostow's model on development, also called the modernization theory on development. And so basically the basic premise of this particular idea is that all countries follow a similar path to development. And so it's almost like this idea that there is a recipe for development. And so if countries will follow this particular recipe, they'll start at point A and they'll end up at, what is that? A, B, C, D, E. They'll end up at point E at the very end, which is high mass consumption. And the idea there is that if they do those things, then they will follow these 5 particular stages and eventually end up where the Western European countries are, where the United States is today, in the age of what's called high mass consumption. So we'll just walk through these 5 stages of Rostow's model and kind of look at those and what are the ideas behind them. So we look at stage 1, country. This is the idea that all countries are all really, even before their states, start off in this particular situation. It's traditional society, it's subsistence lifestyle. Obviously there's not really much economic activity going on, because if you're living a subsistence lifestyle, there's really not a whole lot of trade of any consequence going on. Anything that's produced is going to be consumed by the producer, so there's really no surplus to be traded anyway. And if there are any type of infrastructure or anything like that created, a lot of times it's done by the government. The government, whether we're talking about an empire or a kingdom or something like that, that maybe has control over a certain area, or we're talking about a small tribal group. The idea is that really it's not individuals, but the institution that is creating things, and a lot of times they don't have any real economic consequence. So things like military barracks, things like religious buildings. I always, for whatever reason, I picture in my mind maybe an Aztec type situation where you had like the large city there, and most people living out in little villages, and these large ziggurats that are there in the middle of the town, and they're mostly there for sacrificial purposes and things like that. But anyhow, so again, obviously very primitive form of society, not a whole lot of economic activity going on. Until you move into stage 2, and this is what is called the stage before takeoff. And so this is all, basically stage 2 is all the things that what you're doing is you're laying the foundations for economic development. And so what happens is in stage 2 is you have a couple of individuals who begin investing in economic infrastructure, and who start investing their own money. That's kind of the liberal side of things when you talk about capitalism and investment. So they begin investing their own money in trying to produce and laying the foundations and framework for trade and economic activity. So they'll make investments in things like different forms of technology and different forms of infrastructure. So be doing things like putting in roads, putting in railroads, putting in communications situations. So we think early on, either telephone lines or Morse code, or any of those types of things. That's going to allow communication and transportation between places much easier. So in this type of society, you begin to see surpluses created And as surpluses are created, those surpluses are then traded. And so as those surpluses are traded over the infrastructure that has been developed by these individuals, productivity is going to begin to increase because of increasing investments in ways to become more productive or more efficient, things along those lines. So this is the before takeoff stage. And because of this, we talk about takeoff and all these types of things, and I typically draw a little illustration of a plane taking off, because that's what I always think of when we talk about these different stages. If you go to my review video that's on Rostow's model and the world system analysis, then I have a little diagram, and if you're interested in all in that, probably not, but that's okay. Moving on. So stage 3 is what's called the takeoff stage. This is a stage where you have really the most amount of growth, and really you have the most amount of growth because you have the most room for growth. And so we're talking about a tremendous amount of economic growth for countries, and this is really when you look at industrialization, and industrialization begins. And so this is where, this is the industrialization period, so this is where you have a lot of changes in society taking place. People moving from rural areas to urban areas. People are now working for a wage. Productivity is becoming higher. Efficiency is becoming higher. New forms of energy are being developed. All those types of things. So this is where the economy really begins to expand, again, mainly because you have really the most room for growth. And so in that, what we begin to see happen is an emphasis on industry begins to increase. Industry as a share of the GDP begins to increase, and what we begin to see is agriculture as a share of GDP begins to decline because of the increasing expansion of industrialization. Stage 4 is what we call the stage of the drive to maturity. And so stage 4, what's beginning to happen is you have increasing wealth. Wealth is increasing across the country. There's a diffusion of technology across the country, information technology, transportation technology. And in this stage, industry has topped out as the largest share of the GDP, and so it's overtaken agriculture. And what's beginning to happen, this is really when society socially begins to change a lot, because this is when you start having increased levels of education, you have increased wealth in the country, so now people can begin to afford different types of services. You have an expanding middle class, which is going to demand larger services and things like that. And so with that, you have an increase in skilled labor outside of industry. Parents are able to afford to send their kids to school, who get an education, who go off and get a job that requires education and skill. And then stage 5 is what's called the age of high mass consumption, and so this is where most European countries and the United States are at. So with the stage of high mass consumption, this is an economy that is services oriented, where most people are participating in service industries. Not only that, that's the main driver of the economy. That's what most people are going to be either working in. And if the economy shrinks like we had in the recession over the last several years, it's going to kind of create this ripple effect because of the fact that our purchasing of things is what's driving the economy. Again, this is the stage where you have much higher incomes, much higher levels of education. Obviously, wealth is fairly prevalent across the country. And basically, a society that is based on the consumption of products. There's really not a whole lot of production of products, but there's a whole lot of consumption of products. And so, in this type of industry, the tertiary sector of the economy would be much higher than the secondary or the primary. And of course, like I said, this is where the United States is at today. And what's really important here about a stage 5 country, when we talk about high mass consumption, this is an economy that is driven by the mass production of affordably priced goods, or moderately priced goods. It's characterized by a very large middle class. And these are it's large middle class, high consumption of moderately priced goods that's going to drive the economy. Without that large middle class, without the production and consumption of moderately priced goods, you're not going to be able to generate as much wealth within the economy. So when we look at Rostow's model, again, that's just kind of the platform. If you go back to stage 1 and stage 2 are kind of laying the foundation for economic activity, things like that. And then we kind of top out at stage 5. And so we top out at stage 5 because we really don't know what's beyond this. We really don't know what's beyond stage 5. Stage 5 would be what's considered the post-industrial society. And in fact, in the United States, we actually are regaining some of our industry and we don't know what industry is going to look like in the future. So this is just as far as we've come to this point. So it's entirely possible that this model could change as we move forward into the future, very similar to the demographic transition model and its possibility of change. Of course, there are always critics. It's always easy to be a critic, right? So there are some critics of Rostow's model, but basically what they do is they look at it and say, well, look, this model that you developed is almost exclusively based on the American and the Western European experience. So it doesn't necessarily translate to the other countries and other parts of the world. They also say it doesn't take into account this idea of dependency that European countries have placed on less developed countries. And they also say that Rostow looks at each country as an independent agent, meaning that almost this country develops and exists in isolation rather than being a player in a larger scheme. And so, of course, we know in the global economy, every country is a player in the larger global scheme. So that is Rostow's model, and that is all that we're going to have time for today. I hope you found that to be helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to leave those in the comment box below, and I hope to see you next time.